As the scouting combine is underway in Indianapolis, what are the Lions thinking in terms of the core four's future and also at the tackle position?
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're back, everybody, with a Wednesday edition of a Locked On Lions right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network. Matt Dery with you on day one of the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, a Wednesday, April 25th into Thursday, April 26th. Thanks for being with us. Nick Shook, NFL.com, fine NFL writer, live and direct from Indianapolis, will join us momentarily. We'll ask Nick all about the Combine, players he's looking at, a positional value, the Lions situation, all of that coming up momentarily here today on Locked On Lions. Plus, we got to get into more comments that Brad Holmes made yesterday. And this is the first time I've kind of heard this statement, the core four. Who is Brad Holmes talking about? We'll get into that momentarily right here on Locked On Lions. Shout out, of course, to our everyday listeners. We appreciate our everydayers. And please check out our Everydayers Club at lockedonlions.supercast.com. All right, so we mentioned yesterday the big news, Taylor Decker back, Holmes and Campbell speaking before Decker put it out there that he was returning. Could the Lions save themselves about $11 million and actually tell Taylor Decker to take a walk and they release him? I don't see that happening, but the Lions now have options, all right? Decker wants to return, and that means you've got a very good player at left tackle. You know, I was reading some of the comments from yesterday, and people, let's let Decker. Easier said than done to move Sewell to left tackle and then put an unknown at right tackle. All right? Taylor Decker still is a good football player. The Lions could draft his replacement at 17 and do a draft and stash for a year and let that young player learn. And if that young player is good, they'll find a way to put him out there, especially if Decker is injured as much as he was these past couple of years. But another interesting comment that Brad Holmes made the other day when talking to the media, he said that the team is still having discussions about extensions for the core four, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam LaPorta, Jack Campbell, and Brian Branch. All guys that he drafted 3 years ago that are phenomenal football players. It was Kelvin Shepard, defensive coordinator. He spoke to the beat writers yesterday, and he's like, this is Jack Campbell's defense. This is his defense, and he's going to run with it. But with all the guys that the Lions have re-signed, that they've drafted and kept, St. Brown, Hutchinson, McNeil, the list goes on and on of guys that the Lions have drafted, developed, kept around. Penei Sewell, arguably their best player. Jamison Williams, they're keeping around long-term. It's not easy to keep everybody. The Lions learned very early on that they could not keep a good football player in Jonah Jackson. And we saw this past year how the interior of the offensive line struggled a little bit. But they're talking about extensions for Gibbs, LaPorta, Campbell, and Branch. And quite honestly, good. But there is that theory, and there are folks that think, number one, there's no way you can keep them all. And number two, do you want to extend Jahmyr Gibbs? Jahmyr Gibbs is amazing. He's arguably the best running back in the game. But you've got him for 2 more years after this. And you can franchise tag him, or 2 more years, so 2026, 2027. In 2028, you could franchise tag Jahmyr Gibbs and keep him around, so you know you've got him for 3 more years. But the shelf life of running backs, the body, the wear and tear, and everything else, to me, I look up and I go, first guy that I would want to extend now and even discuss an extension with is Jack Campbell. Because I think he is that important to this defense. We're not sure Anzalone's going to be back next year. And in the middle of that defense, the linebacking core, Jack Campbell this year on a defense that was middle of the pack, as we've talked about, Jack Campbell had a big-time season. Sam LaPorta, awesome tight end, top 5 tight end in the league. Brian Branch, to me, is, and I like to say this on the show, he's a Scud missile out there. He is a really, really good to great safety. And with Kirby Joseph's health in serious question, you got to find a way to keep Branch around. Problem with Brian Branch is he can't stay out of the penalty box. Suspensions, head hunting. He's got to clean up his act this year a little bit before we talk extension. But again, if Kirby Joseph's knee is shot and his career is over, you can't afford to lose Joseph and Branch down the road. And remember, Branch was a second-round pick. There's no 5 years and tag like there is with Gibbs and with Jack Campbell. But I like the fact that Brad Holmes made a point of saying these are guys, these core 4 guys that he drafted, and tip of the cap to Brad Holmes from a couple of years ago. That was an incredible draft to get Gibbs at 12, Campbell at 18, LaPorta in the second, trade up to get Brian Branch, leapfrog the Packers to get Branch was a sick move. And yeah, you want to keep all those guys. But again, it's almost impossible in this day and age of the salary cap and everything else to keep everybody around. Nearly impossible. That's why I wonder about the Gibbs contract with just the wear and tear. But again, this was coming from a general manager yesterday that said, yeah, golly gee, we're talking to David Montgomery's agent. We'll see. Didn't exactly give a giant salute to keeping Monty around for next year. But I like the fact that the Lions are looking at this. And again, the tackle position. If the Lions take a tackle at 17, it is not a knock on Decker. It is to prepare for the future and to add some depth at a position they don't have a lot of depth right now. So there's that. Okay, let's do some business here, and we're going to join Nick Shook from NFL.com. We're going to do that coming up next, right here on this Wednesday edition. I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday edition, Combine Wednesday of Locked On Lions. And welcome to the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft. Yes, Locked On Lions brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. There are 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like confetti craze, fruity rainbow, or cotton candy. There is something for everyone. The board is set. The flavors are ready. Look, I got my number one pick, all right? And I've tried them all. I like 5-Hour Energy. Gets me through the day. Cherry is really good, all right? Light tart edge, classic red fruit profile, bold cherry candy style flavor. Come on, you can't beat that. But let's be honest. Have you had sour apple? That one is very good as well. All the flavors are very good, solid. And again, confetti craze, fruity rainbow, cotton candy, they're also winners as well. 5-Hour Energy shots give you a boost with 0 sugar, all right? A lot of upcoming flavor innovations planned. So get with the program, all right? Find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots, available online at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. And hey, we told you yesterday about my friends at the Old Home Chef. That's right. Looking for meals that are ready to go, that taste really good, and you got dinner planned and it's done. That's why we're talking about Home Chef, all right? Between busy work days, cold winter nights, packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door. With easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great, they're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why, all right? You save time and money. Home Chef customers save an average of $86 per month on groceries. And meals come ready to fit your schedule. 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches. For limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. One of my favorite writers, always love reading him at NFL.com. Nick Shook is with us, fresh from getting ready to go to Indianapolis for the Combine. Nick, great to see you.
It's great to be here, and I feel so honored that you've considered me one of your favorite writers. What a compliment. I'm not good at taking compliments, but I'll take that one gladly.
When are we going to see on NFL Network again? You you sprout up from time to time on the TV as well.
I'll tell you what, I'm as surprised as you are. I just get the call. I'm asked when I can do it, and I do it, and that's that. But you'll see me on NFL Daily all the time.
I love that. Before we could break down the Travis Mazzana homer from Tuesday, which you and I could do all day, but we got to stay focused here. Combine. All right, here we go. Starting up Wednesday. What are you looking at? What's biggest storylines for you as you head to Indy?
God, storylines. Well, I mean, it's a quarterback class that doesn't inspire a lot, but I think it's a good opportunity to get some looks at some guys that we're going to see going in day 2 and day 3. Not a top-heavy group. Really, a lot of this position, some of the most premier players are at, I guess I would say non-traditional positions. Like I saw Bucky Brooks mock draft that he filed yesterday, and he had like Arvell Reese, I think, is like as high as the 4th or 6th overall pick. Caleb Downs was, I think, 5th or 6th. And a couple of Ohio State players that are obviously very good as part of one of the nation's best defenses in college football this year. But I think that's just kind of the story of this draft, is that, you know, we're not getting the big time headline superstar players at the, you know, most attractive positions that we've seen in the past. I'm very curious to see who takes a swing at Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame when we get to the draft. But when it comes to the combine, it's about figuring out the rest of the group. It's not just the headliners. It's not sitting up there and seeing that Bijan Robinson is indeed a much different running back from the rest of his class. It's about picking out the next level of guys, which is my favorite part of the combine. That and you know, of course, networking and catching up with all the people in the business, both, you know, in the club side and also in the media side. But my favorite part of the exercise in the entire week is figuring out the all combine team, which that's what we only figure out when they're on the field. So that's what we're looking forward to. The players set the table with their interviews beforehand, and then the next day they're on the field and getting after it. So expect to see that next week on NFL.com, where you can maybe get some insight, because I've nailed it a little bit in the past. I'm not going to lie. I've pulled some guys. I've plucked some guys that people weren't paying attention. Alex Highsmith being one of them, but it's a long list.
Was Highsmith your best call? What's the Nick Shook best call?
He was a guy that I threw in there. Not my best call. God. I don't know if I have a specific best call, but it's just been a collection of guys over the years that maybe just jumped out on the field that people weren't talking about that much, that ended up talking about it, or they end up getting picked in the 2nd or 3rd round. They end up having very productive careers. Sometimes when you're sitting in the stadium like I will this week and in this weekend, you can just kind of tell. You can just see a difference. And I'm excited to see who pops off the field this weekend. So
we shouldn't give you credit for Isaac Tesla then?
I did like him a lot. I don't know if I included him last year in my all combine. Usually you'll find some of them, if they're not on the all combine team, I'll have an honorable mentions group, but a lot of it's a really close call. And I'll usually list it in like chronological order about like the next guy that was on my list. And I know Tesla was definitely there on that group, because I loved his workout as well. And he had good tape at Arkansas too. I'm glad that he's found a proper home with Detroit and see where he can go.
Nick Shook with us, NFL.com, Indianapolis Combine coming up here, and Nick heading to Indy. Let me ask you just about some position groups, and we'll get to the Lions in a second, your thoughts on Detroit. But Lions are looking at tackles, Lions are looking at centers, Lions are looking at edge rushers, maybe even interior defensive linemen. Anything stick out there where you say, man, there's going to be a lot of this in Indy that we'll take a look at and the Lions could pluck from?
That's a good question. To be completely frank, while I keep up and watch a lot of college football, the sorting of players tends to be something that is done throughout this process. And for me personally, I like to get there, honestly, with the knowledge of what I saw with these guys on the field and kind of let them dictate it from there instead of coming in with any preconceived notions. But I will say that we know that the Lions need to address key specific groups like the offensive line. Let's look at what happened last year, because if you're talking about I guess you could call it downfall of the Lions, it really started in the trenches, and it started on the offensive side of the ball. You knew it was going to happen when you didn't have Frank Ragnow at center. You knew it could happen when you had to change guards, in the offseason because of the shuffling along the offensive line. And then when you suffered injuries, it got even worse. I really liked Tate Ratledge in last year's combine, and I love that they drafted him. Not a perfect rookie year, but I still like his potential. I think that you do go back and add, at least if it's not a starter, it's depth. But I think you need to really explore other options there as well, because what they found during this past season was that when they got hurt, they didn't really have a second option. And the same thing kind of goes for the interior defensive line, in that, you suffered some injuries before the season. You just felt like it was a little bit of a thin group. we've talked about the edge rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson for seemingly like 2 years, whether it was Darius Smith the year prior. How are they going to replace him? You know, He got a little bit of Al-Qadim Muhammad this past season. He was, productive in spots, but they lack depth there as well. So I think the trenches are really going to be the place where they hone in on both sides of the ball and where they can make a big difference in this draft class. But as it pertains to key guys, like I think about the top of the class, I think about the top edge rushers. They are not going to be on the board when the Lions are coming up to pick in the first round, like the Mesidor, like a Ruben Bain, both the kids from Miami, for example. They're not going to be there. Arvell Reese is not going to be there from Ohio State. So like I think the top tier guys that the household names are not going to be there. But I think that we could probably pluck a guy or two from this weekend that we could put on their watch list, which why, to bring it full circle, got to go back to the all-combine team because I do include some position fits with some of these players.
Wait, you just said you think Mesidor will be gone by 17?
Yeah, I do. I think they're both going to be gone before then.
Wow.
And it might get close with Mesidor. He might end up in the teens and just before Detroit picks, which at that point you wonder, does Brad Holmes try to navigate upward to really fill a spot? But I'm going off of, recent mocks. Bucky Brooks's mock that I read the other day. I think it was yesterday that I read. I believe he had Mesidor gone before the Lions pick too.
It's interesting because I really like him, but again, he's 25, and you wonder how many teams shy away from an older player that's spent so much time in college at that spot, But again, like you said, Brad Holmes is always, there's always curveballs thrown by Brad. You just never know. Last year, I don't think anybody expected Tyleik Williams to be his first pick, but yet as the season wore on, Ratledge in the second round was clearly the guy that was most ready to play, and did just that. You mentioned before, just quickly on interior defensive linemen, and look, the Lions are going to have Tyleik Williams back, and they're going to have Ali McNeil back. Likely going to lose DJ Reader in free agency, but how do you like that group? And could that be somewhere you think the Lions go at 17?
Yeah, I actually just referenced the mock because I just thought it was posted, the one that I've been pointing back to, and he actually had Caden Proctor, the tackle from Alabama, going to Detroit at 17. But I think that anytime that you can invest in a guy on the defensive interior in the first round, I think it's a good move. But I also think it's a necessary thing that the Lions should consider, because when I love DJ Reader. I love what he's done throughout the course of his career, but he's a veteran. And I watched the Browns do this for most of the last 5 years, which is we can't draft effectively here, or at least depend on the guys that we have drafted. And we're going to plug it with veterans year after year after year. Sheldon Richardson, Malik Jackson, Malik Collins, Shelby Harris, the most recent two that they threw in there. And I don't want to see the Lions do the same. I think you can do it with one guy per year, but I do think that you need the backing of younger guys that are proven, or at least you believe can become proven players, to really fully flesh out that depth and make your interior as strong as it needs to be in the NFL. I do like the idea of McNeil, Tyleik, and Levi Onwuzurike, even though, you've dealt with some injuries. I love Tyleik coming out of Ohio State, and I would love to give him a longer runway to really prove himself. But maybe you do plug with the veteran like they did. If you don't believe that you have the capital to do it, or the candidate that you believe is fit for it, which a team like Detroit, you're never going to really have a ton of cap space to work with. Then you go through the draft. And at that point, that's when you start looking toward some of these guys. I said I like the idea of it in the first round, but I'm not 100% certain that it's going to fit there. I'm more of a best player available guy when it comes to the draft. Can you match best player available with your strength, or not with your strength, with your weaknesses, what you need to fix? I don't know if it's going to necessarily fall in that direction for them to attack there, but I like it on the surface. Like, generally speaking, I always like to reinforce the trenches, but if I think they're going to find themselves in a spot where they're going to need to consider offensive line first and foremost, which I think is fine, because if you think about the strength of your team, it's the running game and it's protecting Jared Goff. When you were at your best, it was doing that on that side of the ball, and they couldn't really do either, and especially couldn't run the ball down the stretch. That's going to be what they need to focus on most going into 2026 to get this thing back on track.
Real fast, you mentioned offensive line. Let's say Taylor Decker decides he wants to come back and the Lions are open to it, and say, come on back for one more year. And he's your left tackle and Sewell's your right tackle for at least this year. Do you see a scenario where Brad Holmes goes, we're going to draft Decker's replacement now and just stash him for a year? Or you're like, no way, the Lions won't do that because they're still going for it. And this is still a very good football team.
No, I actually think that's a great idea. I think it might be the best idea of all that we've tossed out there so far in this little session, because I believe that when you draft, trying to draft for the short term is short-sighted, and it also, I think, can put you in some tough spots because you don't know. You think that you've done all of your research on these players, but you really don't know with most guys how they're going to adjust to the pro game. And even some of the best hit a bumpy road to start their career. And if you believe that now is the time to go for it, give them the longer runway because the offensive line is so important. It's something you develop year after year after year. So if Decker comes back and he is willing to play, I still draft his replacement because if you believe you're going to go for it this year, you're probably going to go for it the next year and the next year. And based on the core of this team, the way that they're built, they have that runway. They have that window still open, and you need to plan ahead. So while you would like to, in theory, draft the guy that's plug and play, make a difference right away, I like the idea of planning 2-3 years out in advance, knowing that the end is near for one of your key offensive linemen, because the worst place you can be is where they were this past season, which is that, oh no, we lost our franchise center. We moved a guy over to replace him. We drafted a guard. Then we realized our depth came back to hurt us. So at least you give yourself another option there, a guy that you can develop behind a starter. In a pinch, maybe you throw him in there if you think he's ready. It's a more solid approach than I think trying to go for the big swing and immediate return guy.
More with Nick Shook from NFL.com. We'll do that coming up next. I want to ask him about the Lions' approach a little bit, as well as what else he's going to see in Indianapolis. We'll do that next. And Locked On Lions today brought to you by our friends at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching, looking for candidates, less stress, less time, more results. That's what you want to do. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of Locked On Lions will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support the show by saying you heard about Indeed right here on this very show. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Nick Shook with us from NFL.com. A fine NFL writer will be in Indianapolis for the Combine here. So we talked to him on a Wednesday. Nick, we talked last year during the season, but thoughts on just how the Lions season ended, what you saw in 2025, and kind of what went wrong in your mind?
I do think that it started in the trenches. I think that the injuries that they suffered, the retirement of Ragnow, trying to get him to unretire, and then him failing his physical, it was a sign of desperation, and also just pointed to the Lions acknowledging that, oh God, we're in a bad spot right now up there, up front. The fact I talked to Jahmyr Gibbs about this briefly at the Pro Bowl games. I don't even know if you call it the Pro Bowl anymore. It was in San Francisco. It was in a convention center. Jahmyr had an NFC t-shirt on, and I basically was like, the running game disappeared. I mean, what was that like for you? And he's like, well, I mean, it was difficult. It was frustrating, but like, it was also just our reality. And the idea is that you can avoid doing that by preparing better going into the next year. And obviously you're gonna have a new offensive coordinator, and he didn't have any light to shed on that, because he basically just flat out said, I haven't been in the building yet. I haven't been working with him yet. So I can't tell you what it's going to be, but what it should be is a team that focuses personnel wise on strengthening the unit up front, because this is an offense that, for as good as Jared Goff has been, which if you look at his numbers, they're very close to what they've been the last 2 years. He was still very productive, but it didn't look the same. And it didn't look the same because they couldn't run the football in the last month of the season when they desperately needed to do so to win games. They just couldn't establish the run. They couldn't control the game on the ground anymore. Jahmyr Gibbs' threat as a 3-down back seemed to be diminished. David Montgomery disappeared for significant stretches of a lot of this season, and it hurt their offense overall. And then it puts too much on the shoulders of Goff, who is a very fine quarterback when you have a balanced offense. You obviously know what they have at receiver and at tight end and everything else, but when the running game goes, it puts too much on him. You ask him to do too much. You can't protect him nearly as much. You become one-dimensional. You let defenses pin their ears back, and you saw the result. So while a lot of folks would like to point to, let's see, 2 years ago, the defense falling apart, Goff turning the ball over multiple times in that playoff loss to Washington, the defense being the weaker part of their team. I thought it was a collective issue this year that really skewed back toward the offensive side, which is why you made a change at offensive coordinator, which I think was correct. And now the question is, can you get back to what you were before? Can you become that team that can again, win on the ground, like you did earlier in the season? I mean, they still had really good performances early in the season, and it wasn't until you had those injuries up front where the offense just kind of took 2 steps back and it hurt the whole operation. So I still believe in them. It was weird for them I can't believe I'm saying this, considering I was born in the 90s and grew up in the 2000s and 2010s. And we all know that the Lions weren't part of the conversation for that stretch. But it was weird going into these playoffs this year and not seeing Detroit there, because they were still a team that I considered to be legitimate and respected basically until the point they were eliminated. And I think that they will be that team again going into next year. I think Brad Holmes has done a fantastic job as general manager. And Lions fans have every reason in the world to have faith in him and in their coaching staff and everything else. But it was definitely, a bit of a humbling experience, I think, for him and for Dan Campbell and for this whole organization, that reminds them of how difficult it is to, be successful annually, to replicate success from year to year. But I believe that they will get back on the right foot this year, as long as they make a couple of the right decisions, starting again with the trenches.
So let me ask you this. What's the Lions' approach then if you're Brad Holmes? Because the fans, obviously, they'd love nothing more than on March 9th at noon for the Lions to trade for Max Crosby, to sign Tyler Linderbaum and make him the most expensive and highest paid center ever, and hit home runs. And that's never been Holmes' approach, whether it's free agency, the draft. He's done very well. Last couple of years has not been the best, but the Lions have not been one of those teams that just spends on the first day of free agency. They've been very calculated with what they do. How would you approach this if you're Brad Holmes this year?
Does this fan base know that the Lions are currently projected to be $9 million over the cap?
Well, they'll change that. They'll restructure Goff and everything else. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And they'll restructure enough to make it more feasible, right? To clear enough space. But that's not, like you just said, that's not the way he operates. He is a guy who operates with conviction and trusts his eyes. Like, let's go back to that draft in which he took Gibbs and took Jack Campbell and the Sam LaPorta and all, and people were talking about how Gibbs was overdrafted in terms of value and they shouldn't have taken him this high. Look, if you have your guy, you go get your guy. Yeah. And Brad Holmes has repeatedly gone and gotten his guy, multiple guys thrown into Dan Campbell's culture. They've all worked together really well. So there's plenty of reason to trust that he's going to do that again. I kind of dislike free agency, not because of the news rush and the workload, but because it sets fans' expectations to unrealistic levels. And it's not to be like a Debbie Downer for the Lions or any other fan base. It's just that I've been in the shoes where it's like, all right, well, the Browns could go target this guy back when I was in college, and they could go get OJ Atogwe. They needed a safety. Go get him, right? And that stuff doesn't pan out because it often what you're figuring out on paper doesn't fit what the team wants to do, and it's maybe they see it's an overpay for a certain guy and that sort of thing. But we fill this time by trying to project these things because it is the off season and the content machine never stops, and we also individually want each of our teams to be better and those teams to make the big splash moves that you think are going to pay off. But I would like to point you to when Ndamukong Suh signed with the freaking Dolphins. How did that work out? Not really well, right? And that was a big splash signing. Teams that win free agency typically don't win in the following season, save for, I look at last year's example of the Patriots, who had over $100 million in cap space to spend. So they just spent because they had to, and they did well, right? But that's the outlier. Typically, when you spend a lot, you don't get the immediate return on investment. Let's think about the Jaguars a few years ago when they went and gave Christian Kirk a big contract, right? So Lions fans who want the Lions to go make big moves in free agency or make a big trade for Max Crosby, I love that pairing personally. I'm on board with that. It will require a decent amount of capital to pry him from the Raiders, not to mention the cap space that he'll take up with his existing contract. So it's a challenge. It's a massive hurdle to clear in order for that to happen. But I like that more than the idea of just going out and spending willy-nilly just because this is the best player available at this position. Well, that best player that's available at that position might end up making more money than he ever should have because he was the best player in that free agent class. So the measured approach is the one you need to take, and it's the one that Brad Holmes has taken year in and year out, and it's produced success. So trust the process once again.
Nick, always great to see you. Thanks so much for doing this. Safe travels, my friend, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
There he is, Nick Shook with us. Follow all of his stuff at NFL.com. As he heads to Indy for the Combine. This has been a Wednesday edition of Locked On Lions.